is called Telcos Matter, How Are Operators Further Monetizing Audiences Using Online Video. And this talk, or actually this discussion, will be led by Mr. Aravind Venugopal, who is the lead analyst at Media Partners Asia. Media Partners Asia is the leading provider of research and consulting services across Asia's media and telecom industries. At MPA, Aravind specializes in the commercial and technical appraisal of broadcasting, content, pay TV, and broadband industries, with a specialized focus on Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Greater China. So let me introduce to you Mr. Aravind Venugopal, who is the lead analyst of Media Partners Asia. He has some special guests with him also.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like you to join me in welcoming our two panelists to the stage this afternoon. First of all, there's David Goldstein, advisor to the CEO at Axiata, and Lawrence Chan, head of product at MyRepublic. Thank you. So it's back to a panel session where we discuss OTT and where the telcos fit in. So we've got obviously the mobile telco and we've got fixed line as well. Probably if I can kick things off with you, David, to start off. You know, one of the things that we've been talking about for the last probably 3, maybe 5 years is that pay TV is getting saturated in many markets, that growth is slowing down. But is there an opportunity to move beyond the household, which is what pay TV targets, and start looking at consumers as users? And that's where telcos fit in, right? Because you're looking at individual users in the household. Is that really doable, though? Is it all just talk, or is it really a way for us to implement that? How are telcos looking at it?
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for having me here. Look, I think it's already happening. When consumers want content, they find a way to get it. What is not happening is it hasn't been really integrated into the offerings of mobile operators so far. We're working hard on it, and I think it's inevitable it's going to grow, given content consumption is moving from the household to the individual and the relative position of the mobile operator.
Mm-hmm. So as a telco, you're able to target those individual households, but the moment you start pairing that with content, how does that work? How do you get content to individual users within the household? I know it's happening at the moment, but a lot of this is, you know, in some cases it's pirated content. It's not necessarily legally through pay TV platforms.
Look, the content is getting to individuals, either through illegal sites. People are very creative to get the content they want. What our job is as an operator is to make it easier for them to get it in a legal way, to partner with the content providers so that it can get to all of our users in a legal way. Where our relative strengths sit is we can authenticate a user. We have an ongoing payment relationship that can make the relationship very easy for them to pay for content.
Right, so you know the customer and you have the billing relationship. Lawrence, perhaps if I can bring you in, you're the new kid on the block with MyRepublic. Well, fairly new, 3 to 3.5 years old.
2.5.
Right, so you've basically taken on the incumbents. You've taken on Singtel and you've taken on StarHub in a market where it's pretty much been divvied between the two of them. What's your USP?
Well, when we started, we never intended to become an incumbent ourselves. We value speed and innovation, right? And incumbents are usually not associated with that. We believe that we actually have a niche group of customers that we are looking at. This niche group of customers exists across the world. They are high-end users. They are the biggest users of OTT content and streaming. And they require that quality of service of their telco pipe to ensure they get next generation content to their homes, to their own usage as fast as possible, and as great experience as possible. So that's our single USP, a first-class service for a customer. And if you want a really, really good internet connection, that's where we play. So typically, we are looking at between the 5 to 15% of a demographic that is usually these kind of customers, and that is our core audience.
Understood. But one thing I'd like to point out from having gone through your website and looked at the pricing, you mentioned you're targeting that niche customers who really willing to, might be willing to pay for content, get fast access to the broadband pipe. But you're charging $49.99 for a 1 gig speed when I'm paying $59 for a 50 meg speed at home. And I'm in Singapore as well. So you're essentially commoditizing the broadband pipe, right? Is that the end game, or where does it go from here?
We believe that eventually all the incumbents actually have to come down to our price point and come to meet us at our speed. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, maybe the year after. But what we want to ensure is that telcos are fighting on the level of quality of service and not hiding behind fictional speed segregation. So we kind of blasted the market with what we have done. Basically, every household, there's only one speed. 1 gigabit per second is the most practical and fastest speed that you can get, considering that all CPs in the market are essentially all gigabit Ethernet anyway. So now you have your best speed already. So what's next? When you get that complication out of people's heads, that is where we can start making sure that they can enjoy content. Do we introduce you to great OTT providers? Do we introduce you to local or foreign content? That is where the playing field is. We master a relationship with the customer. We ensure they get what they want.
Right. So, in your words, and I quote you on this, you're a proponent of cord cutting, correct?
Definitely.
So, what does that mean? I mean, you're commoditizing broadband, and I'm playing the devil's advocate here. You're commoditizing broadband.
Unless one day I'm triple play as well. No, I'm kidding.
Is that on the pipes?
No. We believe in partnerships. I don't think we're ever going down the triple play path, but we do believe in mobility. So eventually we want to get to mobility as well.
Interesting. So at some point, if the ministry were to auction more spectrum, you'd look at picking up some spectrum in the mobile range?
If it's viable, it's definitely part of the plan.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm sure there must be some investors out there keeping their ears open. Let me come back to you, David. One of the things that we've been talking about for quite a while now is that pay TV providers and the content operators know content. They know the demographics. They know how to sell and market and program for the consumers. But the telco business is all about selling a particular product. In some cases, it's a utility product, but they know their consumers. Are telcos equipped to sell content? Is it in their DNA?
Fundamentally, no.
Right.
And that's why we have to partner. There's a fundamental conflict between telcos and content players. Telcos, by nature, we like to spend, say, $1 billion, sit back for 10 years and figure out how to milk money from that. And you have a few very big decisions to make that you can study. Content is about changing every single day. And it's fundamentally different. And to be honest, we're not that good at it yet, but we need to partner. We need to exploit our strengths of the customer relationship, like I said, authentication, billing. There's very few alternatives of where the mass market trusts someone to keep their prepaid balance, like a telco.
Interesting. And in your view, have you seen any OTT providers or OTT solutions by telcos being successful in any of the markets across Asia or elsewhere, where they've actually managed to understand that this is what's required to move a customer from being a pure mobile customer to actually consuming content and delivering that great content to them?
Look, in my opinion, the pieces of the puzzle are just coming together now in terms of network quality, the required network quality to deliver a decent experience, which you can now get, and this has really come together in the last year. The speeds are going up, the latencies are going down, primarily with investments in LTE, which is growing rapidly. You will have Southeast Asia coverage in the next year or so. So we're at the very beginning. I think you can't compare what is the potential to what has happened to date, as the situation is very different given the quality improvements in the network.
Interesting. What about you, Lawrence? I mean, you provide a teleport service to users to get content from Netflix, from Hulu, from any OTT platform across the world, including the iPlayer. Where do you guys see yourself in that piece of the pie? Do you think you will just remain the pipe, or do you plan to take things a step forward, either partnering with them, as David mentioned, having a formal relationship, or where do you see yourself progressing from here?
I think I think eventually, geo-protection of rights will fade away in the long run. It just does not make business sense in the long run. Whether that is a 5-year or 10-year away, I don't know. But in the current situation, the strategy for a telco is to master that relationship with end users. I think David mentioned it very correctly, is that it's very important that we are a trusted building platform. We are a trusted curator of, to a certain sense, services, but not content. Yeah, and that within this 5 years, using the teleport service, our goal is to keep educating customers on what's potentially out there. And when those OTT providers, or even the local ones, start expanding in this part of the world, I think we are poised to partner with them to bring them into our customer base.
Understood. And do you have any partnerships currently at the moment? Because I know you have something to do with Toggle, correct? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
We actually have, we are lovers of OTT content, because we got no content ourselves, so that's is, I think, that very natural. So the local guys love us, right? Because we have no conflict of interest. I don't have a conflict of interest of putting my own content out. So it's very natural for the local guys to come over and find us. And for us, yeah, it's a happy relationship. If you have a good OTT service in this part of the world, I will do business with you any day, and I'll help push you out to my customer base.
Again, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. So where's the monetization model there? Because as a broadband provider, you're providing the pipe, but they're making the upside as the number of customers increase, whereas your bandwidth is eventually at some point going to get choked with the amount of streaming traffic. Now, you shared some data with me backstage, which will be great if you can share that with the public here as well. But once 4K, once ultra-high def content starts pouring through that pipe, will that 1 gig be enough? And what will it do to your margins as people start consuming more of that?
Okay, so today streaming takes up about 60% of my entire network.
Right.
And that, if you have been in the telco industry long enough, is actually very scary. It's a very scary stat. Okay, and once HD content starts coming in, ultra HD content starts coming in, I think all telcos will be hard at work trying to solve it.
Yeah.
When you talk about ISPs or just pipe providers, right, you have to divide two things. Firstly is local access ring, and international pipe capacity. Now, where the choke points are essentially very expensive international pipe capacity, when you look at local rings itself, they are more than enough to support Ultra HD. This 1 gigabit network I provide to households is more than enough to have 5 to 10 people within a household all streaming an Ultra HD movie. It's there. So the importance is to get that content locally. So our strategy is this, right? We need to partner with the right OTT guys who are willing to bring that content and cache it within a local context. And they're actually already doing that.
Right.
If you look at how Akamai or the other CDNs are doing it, they are actually, even if Netflix is available in the States, they actually cache in Singapore through Akamai. Most of the famous, the more popular videos are all there.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think they already have grand plans for the world, and that's why they're already doing that. So us using Teleport, we are just leveraging on what people are doing right now. But eventually they'll be here, they'll be cached.
And you plan to start, sorry. And you plan to start charging for the teleport service, is it?
We are already charging for teleport service today. Probably we have a good 5 to 10 years of continuously charging for it. But eventually when they're here, I think maybe teleport will be a thing of the past. But yeah, the play is good for 5 to 10 years, my belief.
Interesting, thanks. David, let me sort of bounce that point which he mentioned. So the fixed line networks seem to be relatively comfortable. At least in Singapore they are. In some other markets where fiber is being rolled out, they should be. How does it play out for mobile? Because, you mentioned that not all base stations across Southeast Asia are fibered up. A lot of them use, microwave systems, which just don't have the capacity. Could you tell us a bit more about how that infrastructure is structured?
Look, we have a huge challenge there because our mobile networks are configured for basically voice calls, web surfing. your average length of a voice call is less than a minute, 40 seconds, 30 seconds. Even your web surfing session is very short, maybe a minute and a half on average on your mobile phone. Our networks are configured for that type of usage. So we can balance the traffic as people are off the network, on the network, and these are not bandwidth hungry apps. Everything changes if we're very successful, say, and we get a large percentage of our customers starting to watch the same event or even watching movies at the same time in a close geographic proximity.
Right.
Our networks will explode because they're not built for someone to sit on their phone for even 20 minutes.
So where's that choke point coming in? Is it because of the lack of fiber in the ground, or is it the lack of number of base stations? What's the exact, if you were to pinpoint it, what would be the real problem within that network?
Look, in a mobile network, you're fundamentally limited by the air interface. Just by spectrum is a limited capacity.
Right.
And you can always up your capacity. It just costs money and you have to do it in a smart way. And with LTE, we can optimize our networks to enable people to receive an hour movie. But it is going to take some configuration. It is going to take some adjustment. The reality is we don't know what is the average consumption of content on a mobile phone right now. We have some usage, but not enough for us to do our planning. We have decades of voice usage. We can optimize to the finest amount with the minimal investment to deliver a high quality voice service. But moving to content, it gets very expensive, especially live events,
Right.
which people do want to watch.
You had an interesting anecdote about mobile network trying to stream live events, didn't you? Is that something you can share on stage, or? All right, fair enough. Right, Lawrence, let me come back to you on a point that he mentioned. It's about spectrum again. In a lot of countries, especially in the US, in certain parts of Europe as well, you're starting to see Wi-Fi hotspots being built out, where mobile providers, telcos can sort of offload their traffic. Is that a space you're looking at, where you'll start providing capacity to the big boys?
It's actually definitely a space we are looking at. Wi-Fi offload is definitely a key strategy for us. So in Singapore, we have this open access fiber framework, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think about 20 countries in the region are actually all looking towards open access wholesale frameworks. Now, what is the good part about open access wholesale frameworks is that at least there is government backing to try to get these fiber points into as many places as possible, right, and as easily as possible. Back in the day when you are just an incumbent and have to go and lay cables yourself, getting the cable to the right place is always the challenge. And now that you have an open access framework, you are actually able to bring fiber to many, many different places. And because of that, as a fiber player, it becomes really, I would say not easy, but definitely simpler,
Right,
to be able to provide Wi-Fi offload. The strategy should be along the way of working with your end users to get as many Wi-Fi points out as possible, and taking a portion of that and using that for Wi-Fi offload. And if you can do that, I think it might help solve some of that spectrum congestion issues. But of course, I think it needs a lot of willpower of an entity, ISP, to be able to do that. Because what you're talking about is actually trying to get all your end users to install a public Wi-Fi access point within their homes. Is it going to be on 24 hours? Is it going to be available? But with enough distribution, I believe that is actually a viable solution.
right. But then that sort of, since you mentioned about the end user Wi-Fi hotspots, we've seen a couple of those models popping up in Europe where it didn't really take off. So here in Singapore, being a small country, can the ISPs, take it upon themselves to set up the Wi-Fi hotspots? Is that being done? I mean, are you or any of your competitors actually setting up hotspots by yourself without involving the end user?
Right now, actually, very limited. There are some strategic locations where the incumbents actually install public Wi-Fi hotspots, certain key franchise cafes, certain public tourist locations, just for some advertising. And perpetually, what you notice is that the people actually who use it tend to be tourists,
Right.
and not locals.
So is it lack of knowledge that these hotspots exist?
Lack of knowledge and convenience. Singapore is too fast-paced a country for people to stop and then switch to a Wi-Fi hotspot.
Okay.
Even single sign-on limits your amount of audience to a certain amount who are willing to go install the app or register at first. So we actually did some experiments. We were installing Wi-Fi hotspots, and we actually put the word free in front of the Wi-Fi hotspots in heartland locations within Singapore, like shopping malls and all that. And we put sensors to track how many people actually pass by. And literally, almost nobody actually logged onto the Wi-Fi hotspot. And that, you would think that would happen. Of course, this changes when you put it to a location where there are people sitting down and trying to enjoy themselves. So it's not that viable. So what I believe is that it's not about a Wi-Fi hotspot. It's about working with mobility providers on providing Wi-Fi offload. Then that will become more seamless.
So you provide the backhaul for them essentially, sort of.
And Wi-Fi space, yes.
Right. Okay. David, back to LTE, because I know you touched upon that and then we moved away from that topic. How confident are you that LTE or 4G will solve this issue of delivering content to the consumer? Because they said the same thing with 3G. And I could barely watch a 30-second YouTube video when 3G came out in India. I gave up hope after a point. So will 4G go down the same route, or are you a lot more positive about it?
Look, I think we have to have different types of content consumption for the means of delivery you're using at that moment.
Okay.
So if you're planning to use ultra-high definition, don't go on a mobile network.
Right.
It's not going to make sense, and you're not going to get the quality, or you're not going to get that high of a quality. This doesn't have to be cannibalization of services. There's a different type of content consumption that should happen on a mobile. There's a certain type that should happen at home,
Right.
certain type that should happen on a Wi-Fi network. I was all ready to partner with My Republic till he told me he wants to buy Spectrum and be my competitor.
No, I can change that. I can change that.
But will LTE solve the problem? Look, the LTE is an incredible technology, but it is about network optimization. The challenge is going to be, how long will it take us to establish a consistent level of consumption of content by our users and get an in-depth understanding? Once we get that, I'm very confident we can configure our networks to meet that need. But right now, it's unknown. People just aren't doing it. It will take a certain amount of time for us and a certain critical mass, just like it took with voice, of having a real understanding, and then we need to adjust our networks. We can meet the content needs, but we may not be able to deliver even HD. But I don't know if you really need HD if it's being delivered to your iPhone.
Interesting. So I'm not sure if there's anyone from Samsung here, but yesterday Samsung demoed a new service called Project Glued. It was a sort of a launchpad for them yesterday, where they talked about delivering long-form video and content to the mobile device, to the tablets, to the phones, and to the smart TVs. Now, much of that is likely going to take place over a wireless network. What does that then mean for them? Because if the network cannot support HD, which is what, if I'm not mistaken, they're trying to push out as well, the network, even in places like Singapore, don't support it, that's a business model that has a big question mark in front there.
Look, I think this is a holistic effort. This cannot be the device player doing it alone, the operator doing it alone, or the content player. We're all going to have to figure this out together and figure out what is the model that lets us all make up some money. And most importantly, deliver a decent service to the customer that the customer doesn't say, I can get a good enough service on piracy, I want to go there. So can we offer a better service? Can we make it easy to authenticate? I'm fully with Lawrence on authentication. People don't want to sign on again.
Understood.
And that's our relative strength. I can authenticate. Mobile networks are the best authenticator worldwide. I can authenticate my user wherever they are in the world if they just turn on their phone. I know where they are, I know who they are, what type of services they've authorized to be debited from their account. There's no one else like a mobile network for this. Have we fully exploited that capability? Definitely not. Have we fully exploited our incredible billing capability where we have control down to the second, because we need to cut off users if they're doing strange phone calls to strange places that are very expensive? That is already in place. The money's in the ground. I just need to open up the APIs with our partners and go from there. And that's what we're focused on right now.
Right. So those are your key strengths: the billing relationship, the billing platform, the relationship with the end consumer. But what, in your opinion, is a telco's biggest weakness when they're sitting in the content game?
pricing, packaging, what content do the users want, it's just not something in our normal scope of business.
But why is that? I mean, presumably you could go out and hire a few folks who know the business and then bring them on board. But why is it that telcos haven't managed to get it right till date? I mean, you've seen a few examples here and there. We've seen, PCCW doing it fairly well. You've seen BT now starting to sort of revive their IPTV business in the UK. But apart from that, we rarely see any great examples of telcos who, really hit it out the ballpark when it comes to content.
Like I said, I think the networks haven't been ready, so it hasn't been our highest priority.
Right.
The networks are now ready, and it is a big priority. Look, streaming content to replicate your home pay TV service is just not going to cut it. So I don't need content specialists that have sat in a pay TV operator. I need content specialists that understand mobile. Now, I don't really think they exist yet. It just there hasn't been enough volume of consumption. There are people out there that know more than others, but only through hard experience are we going to really be able to do this. It just takes time.
Right. And is that a space, Lawrence, that MyRepublic will be ever looking at? I know you want to partner with the content providers, but do you aspire to enter the content business in any form?
I don't think so. As I said, it's a partnership model.
Right.
I think the only thing we do is curation of that partnership. So,
What do you mean by that?
so in essence, I can choose to push Netflix to you or push Hulu to you. So I'll say a bit of different content, but more or less attracts a similar genre of audience. So that to me is something that telcos will play a big part. How will that play out? How will that work in the commercial model? I think only time will tell. And I think that's where our role is actually. It's more on curation of the partnership itself.
Okay. You touched upon Teleport a couple of points back, and we mentioned that Singtel and StarHub aren't too happy about it. What are the options over there? Because we've seen this being played out in the press that they're looking at VPNs. They've tried to lobby the government to do something about VPNs. Now the government is finally moving on site blocking, but not yet on VPNs. Now Teleport sort of, if I'm not mistaken, falls under that second bucket of VPNs. What happens if? How do you think that situation will play out?
I don't think it will change. Reality is that VPNs are, at the end of the day, just a pipe, correct? Is just a virtualized pipe. And you can't go like, oh, I'm blocking virtualized pipes, because at the end of the day, it's like blocking a piece of infrastructure. You can choose to block content, but are these content illegal? They're not. The site blocking thing in Singapore is meant to attack the more notorious of content rights breaches. But when you look at things like VPNs and access to OTT providers, these are legitimate companies with legitimate rights. So how will that play out? I don't think it will play out. I think it will just be an area that people will live with until the providers actually come down. Now, there are various technologies to get these content. Right. VPNs are the most traditional ones of them, but we all know the traditional VPNs are slow. They may not be cost effective. And streaming Netflix video in Singapore, if it's not in good quality, what's the point? Yep. So we do smart routing, and we've been talking to quite a few providers in the region who want to license the same technology for their users. In fact, even some of them are mobile providers. Of course, their main concern is bandwidth. The good thing is that, as mentioned earlier, a lot of it is all in CDNs and cache locally anyway, so it's good for everybody. Yeah, so that's the way we'll continue playing it for the time being.
All right, thanks. I just want to check if there are any questions from the crowd at this point. Do we have a microphone to go around in case any questions? No? Okay. Well, David, let me bring you back in this point. I know we discussed why, what are the difficulties that telcos have in playing the content game. But when it comes down to cost components, obviously the content costs are a big issue. Minimum guarantees are a big pain in the backside for telcos, operators across the board. What's the way around that?
Look, we have to understand what is driving the content providers in demanding these minimum guarantees. They can't provide to us the same content they give to the pay TV operators with a minimum guarantee and say, for you, telco operator, no minimum guarantee. It's going to cause an issue for them. Can we construct a limited type of content or a limited package of content that is well received on a mobile phone, but maybe not well received on a 60-inch flat screen? Less resolution, highlight films.
Right.
There's certain, I believe there's certain type of content that is better received on a mobile that couldn't be put over typical pay TV.
Interesting, because when we look at user stats and usage reports that come out from US and Europe, where the service has really taken off the ground, we notice that it's the same content that's being consumed on the television, on the main TV, that's also on tablets and in some cases on the phones. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you get similar content? Because as a user, I may want to watch House of Cards or Game of Thrones or whatever on my phone or on my tablet when I'm on the move. How do you then distinguish? How do you get the content rights owners to say, we'll license this sort of content for you at a lower price, but the main content, the main show, will go only on pay TV?
Look, I think some of the content will be similar and
Right.
some won't. For even a tablet screen, the resolution can be much lower, and you'll have a decent experience. But again, it's purely experimentation on what is the customer demanding, what do they want, and how do we package it. But this is the challenge. We have to be humble enough to admit we don't know. But if we don't know, I can't make a huge bet.
Right.
But we all have to work together to get the experiment out there, to get this understanding.
And are any of the telcos who've deployed OTT platforms on their own, are any of them making money off of the service? Not just revenues, but profitability-wise.
I think you're the regional analyst, so I'll ask you.
Well, so far we've seen decent user interfaces coming out of places like Malaysia with Astro on the go. Foxtel's got a fairly decent service that's been deployed. They've got a new service, that came out earlier this year, late last year. But no, I mean, to answer that question, no, we really haven't seen a cross-regional OTT platform that can buy content from across the territories, that has a scale of local content, and be able to amortize that cost. They don't have that sort of user base at this point.
Look, your biggest cost, okay, of course, content is there.
Sure.
We have some network implications. The biggest cost, the biggest challenge we face is awareness.
Interesting. Okay.
Do people understand how to use, say, Astro on the Go or any other equivalent service?
Right.
Do they have their username authentication ready, their Astro password or whatever their pay TV? Do they understand what they see an advertisement for Astro on the Go? Do the masses understand what that means?
Okay.
And how do we get that awareness out there? And currently, how does Astro bill for that, or any pay
Right.
TV? It's the awareness factor is going to take time. Mobiles have that daily relationship with the customer, where we know the demographic profile of every customer. We know their usage pattern. We have a lot of analysis understanding who they are, what they want. When I give those demographics to my content partners, I would expect them to come back to me with some recommendations on content. And let's try it.
Right.
I won't say we are ready to put money in the ground to stimulate content consumption over the mobile phone. Or else, why am I putting all this money in the ground to increase speeds?
Sure.
What other service is demanding the speeds that LTE delivers? So we are putting the money in the ground in the networks, and we now need to make sure we develop the services that will need and utilize that speed.
Right. So are there any pay TV operators at this point in time across the region that are actually talking to telcos and saying, we'll provide you the content? You take care of the billing relationship, you can take care of the marketing because you know the end subscriber. We don't have access to the user. We have it to the household, but not to the user. Do you see any of those happening across this region?
Look, we're on friendly terms with most pay TVs across the region. We even have some of our own pay TV operations. This is being explored. Like I said, we're at the initial stage. I believe the pieces of the puzzle are there now. Right. We just have to assemble them.
Interesting. Well, thank you, David. And one last question for you. So Mount Public, it's about 3.5, 4 years old now. You've gone through your first round of funding. What's next?
Okay, so regional expansion is next, right? So we just got our New Zealand license. We are starting to conduct infrastructure rollout in New Zealand.
Right.
In 2015, we plan to be in Australia.
On the NBN there.
On the NBN.
Yeah.
So we are pure NBN play. So we're going anywhere there's NBN play. Backstage we talked about Malaysia. Definitely one of the countries we're interested in as well.
Sure.
So here's the play, right? From a content perspective.
Yeah.
We are going into every single country that we can find and scooping up the top 5 to 10 and 15% of high-end niche users who will be the first adopters of OTT and streaming content. When your content providers come over to this part of the world, if you want to have access to this early adopter group, work with MyRepublic.
Interesting.
And that is the play. And of course, we're planning an IPO somewhere in 2017, I guess. That's our guess. Nothing in stone, but yeah.
One last question. Since you mentioned content and you're going into Australia and New Zealand, will the regulators there be as open as the Singaporean regulators with regards to teleport? What's your initial sort of feedback?
With regards to us as a whole, they are very happy to get us there. The problem with all these NBNs is that when you put down a lot of NBN money as a government, and there are no new providers coming up, everyone starts to question the policy, right? You just sunk $40 billion and there's no new competitor. There's something wrong. So they're very happy for us to come over. In terms of teleport, as long as regulatory framework-wise, we're not breaking any laws, I think that everyone's happy to let us come in. And so far, we started a region. We're fine on that side of things. So I think everyone's happy to do business.
All right. Well, fingers crossed and all the very best to you. Thank you.
Thanks.